So listen again to Mark as he talks in chapter 14, verse 17 through 31, about the evening such as we're doing right tonight. When it was evening, he came with the 12. And when they had taken their places and were eating, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." And they began to be distressed and said to him one after another, "Surely not I." And he said to them, "It is one of the 12, one who is dipping bread into the bowl with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would be better to have that for that one not to have been born." It goes on in Mark's gospel. While they were eating, he took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it and gave it to them and said, "Take, this is my body." And then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, and all of them drank from it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I tell you, I will never drink of this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." Then they had sung a hymn. They went out to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus said to them, "You will fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." And Peter said to him, "Even though all fall away, I will not." And Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, this day, this very night, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. Peter says vehemently, "Even though I must die with you, I will not deny you." And all of them said the same. We know Peter didn't get it right, did he? He had a good intention, but it didn't get off the ground. I'm talking about the theme of trouble tonight, which you and I have enough of in our lives, and other people we know have trouble as well. Charlie Brown and Linus are speaking in one of the cartoons of Peanuts. And Linus says to the effect, "I don't like to face my problems. I think the best way to solve problems is to avoid them. No problem," Linus goes on to say, "is so big or so complicated that it cannot be run away from." That's one solution for problem taking, isn't it? Irving Berlin had the same problem. His somewhat different, but it also disturbed him. He had written the music for Alexander's ragtime band, and it became so very popular, everybody knew it. Remember the film with Jimmy Cagney dancing to the music of Irving Berlin? I like to go back to those old movies because that was when I was a kid and remember them. I don't know the current heartthrobs of male or female fans. But he said, in effect, that because I was so successful at that, I always lived in some troubled fear that I couldn't live up to the standard I had set. Isn't that strange? You're very successful, but then the fear is not that you'll fail, but that you'll be so successful that you'll forget to be a little bit humble in the face of new creation. Dare I say that all of us have faced problems of one size or another. There are lots of ways that we human beings deal with our stress and our problems. Withdrawal. I grew up in a family with an alcoholic father, and one night when I was 12 years old, it happened that he was beating up on Mom. And I came down the stairway, and I had a fight with my father, and I cut his eyebrow in the fist fight that we had. I was a pretty big, tall kid at that point, but rangy, what I'm getting back to in my elder years. But Dad said to me that night, He came back upstairs where Merle and Roger and Dennis and I, my three brothers at that time, were tucked into bed. He came up and he said, "Don, you will not see the sunrise." Now, I held out pretty well for not going to sleep, okay? But I did wake up in the morning and I was alive and well. But Dad and I had some issues to deal with, didn't we? His abusive mother, but also his not caring about the family and the threats. So we have those problems that we deal with, and there are ways of running away from it or encountering it. For that night, I encountered the urge to stop my father from doing what he was doing, which was destructive of my mother. But at the same time, I lost something of respect for my father. Sometimes we lose even if we gain something else in this time of trying to solve problems when we're under stress. Some people resort to that kind of thing, violence, as their way of dealing. Husbands and wives, parents and children sometimes get into shouting matches as to who has the most authority. And sometimes there are doors banged and words spoken that are violent and intended to be violent, to threaten the other person with the power that one or the other in the group has. Sometimes we rely in our culture on destructive behaviors. And I think of the alcoholism that I spoke of in my father. That was a destructive refuge that he took, because it did take some of the pressure off him. He could forget it for a time. And it didn't seem to affect him that much, but I remember finding his bottles hid in the barn or in the corn crib, and I would dump them out on the ground, and he would be really angry with me, but he never came back to fight with me again. But that kind of thing is the kind of thing that keeps us from dealing with the problem, whatever it was with Dad. His dad died when he was 10 years old. My grandfather would be, Rev Nichols. He died in the Kalamazoo State Hospital. State Hospital is just what it sounds like. It was a refuge for people who were mentally unbalanced. Grandpa had become ill. He was a confectioner. He had a little store in Otsego, Michigan, where he sold candy and all that kind of stuff, ice cream. But he had a breakdown of some kind, and they had to put him in the hospital. He thought he was eating cats and dogs. And the psychiatrist at head of the hospital, when I found this information out, said he was just burnt out. He burnt himself out and died shortly in the hospital just because he couldn't sleep, he couldn't do anything except succumb to the power that was over him in terms of his mental breakdown. Drugs and alcohol, all kinds of refuges we try to find an answer to our problems. Perhaps one of the best ways to deal with that, I know pastors say, well, take it to God. I'm sorry, God, sometimes when we're in deep trouble, even though we know you exist, somehow it's hard to ask you for it because we don't know if you'll do something right away for us. Is that true for you, that you sometimes wonder if God will do it right away because that's when you need it? But God sometimes sends us somebody that can help us through a difficult patch. The other thing is we blame God. I've heard that in my counseling ministry. I did a doctoral degree at Drew University, and our studies were partly in the psyche area of human life. And we do blame God and others for our problems. It's our wife, our parents. How many ever had said, I'm that way because of my dad, or I did that because of something breakdown in the family? We do that. And if we can't blame the parents, we sometimes blame God. I think particularly of the deaths that you and I experience in loved ones, and we've said to God, oh, don't take them, but God takes them anyway. And we feel somehow as if God was not involved in that, but just out of meanness destroyed the life of a loved one. There's another way to deal with these things, and that is to deal with problems, to seek out someone you trust. Seek out your spouse if that's a good relationship, and talk about what's going on in your life before it gets to crisis points, okay? That's a good piece of advice, I think. and it seems to work. Let's reflect on our scripture with the disciples because they're in the same boat. They're in trouble. They know things are going badly now. Jesus has said to them how bad they're going to be. They're going to deny him, right? They're going to just turn their back on him. Peter says, "No way will I do that. No way will I do that, Jesus." They're eating. Jesus speaks of the betrayal of the disciples. And they all said, that's all of them as Mark records it, "Surely not me." In my lifetime, there are moments in my life too where I've said, "Surely God, not me. Will I do something that is so reprehensible, not just to you, but to myself? If that's what I have to bear, then that's a heavy burden that one struggles with. And if a father beats up on a son or tries to, I suppose that my father had to carry that the rest of his life, knowing me and knowing his anger, but also a disappointment in himself. Disappointment in himself that he broke down and allowed that encounter to take place. Jesus speaks of betrayal in this meal. "Surely not me," he says to one of them. Oh yes, it's going to be you. It's going to be all of you. At this point, they know nothing of Friday, and they know nothing of Sunday, do they? They haven't heard anything about this crucifixion that's going to take place the next day. They're just in that mood of eating a good meal and having wine, I suspect. Jesus poured out a cup for them, and wine would have been the beverage at that time. And they don't know. It's only later in the scriptures of Mark's gospel where he talks about this, and he goes off to pray by himself. You remember that story? He goes off and they gather. He says, "Stay here. Stay here with me for a while." And he goes off and they get together. And after a while he comes back. What are they doing? Anybody want to tell me the answer? What has happened to the disciples? Shout it out. Sleeping. And he says, "Could you not wait for me just a little while? Couldn't you be here for me when I came back and needed you?" And they just sloughed it off. Sloughed it off. We were tired. We've been on the road a lot, Jesus, and you've told us we're going to fail. And so we've been talking about that, and most of us felt we ought to go to sleep to deal with that problem. So there's Jesus. And he goes back, and it's not too long after that the betrayal comes. And Judas comes and says, "There he is. That's the one." And the rest of the story plays out tomorrow in the story of the crucifixion and the story on Sunday of something that God has in mind in a way of recapturing us and recapturing the disciples so that someday Peter, who made a mistake saying, "I don't know the guy outside the court, I don't know him," goes to a crucifixion himself, they say, in Rome. And the same with Paul later on, who wasn't a disciple, but an intimate friend of Jesus and a disciple and an apostle. That's what happened for Maundy Thursday, and we know it was with Jesus. He was on a road of trouble, and the disciples were as well. Discipleship. That's you and me together in this world. I want to just reflect for a minute with you the spiritual reflections I've had in my passage through life in these 88 years, and to invite you into a journey where you dare to encounter the problems or the troubles that you have. As I said Sunday, I've lost 2 wives to cancer, bowel and esophageal cancer. That's troublesome to me. But I don't think I lost faith in God, because whatever has happened to those 2 souls, God cares for them. And God continues to care about a farm boy who in a small church in Michigan called one day when he was 8 years old to become a minister of the gospel. And so I tell you the good news. The night that's coming is terrible, and Friday is tragic. But God doesn't keep the secret of life in those events. The secrets of life and companionship and the love that God shows to us happens early in the morning when everybody else is asleep and they haven't come to the tomb yet. They're going to find something there. So don't take that too much for granted, okay? That was a gift from God, not a given in history. With the Romans killing someone, it was very strange that person would later become a resurrected person.